For those of you who just came in from the pool or the beach on the great sunny afternoon, I'd like to welcome you to Northminster Presents, one of our long series, I think, 50 times. Second one here, with something. And it's brought to you by the men's prayer and study group. The group that has 4 or 5 years of it in age. It's been around a long time. A group of rusty old men that get together every other Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. And we share a bagel and fellowship and our faith and everyone involved. You know, tonight we have a very special program. We love these fireside chats. We need to thank Mom for this fireplace here.
It's not a fireplace.
That's moving off. This is a unique opportunity for us to delve a little bit in the intimate life of Carol, depending on what Jennifer has in store for her. But we love her and we're glad that she's here. We're celebrating her. So without any further ado, there is no bio to give you because this is plain seen the body. That's how I'm done.
This looks like her. Yeah, look here.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Jim, Jeff, John, everybody who's made this possible.
It took a lot of men to set this up.
It's a very technical, it's a good technical crew. So thank you for that. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to start with, it's not going to be traditional bio kind of stuff. One, you could Google anything about Carol. And two, we've had a lot of Proclaim articles and other things about her, so we've done that. So this is going to be the more, non-traditional kind of conversation, or the deeper dive. But Carol doesn't know I'm going to start with a particular kind of introduction. I don't do art projects. But I made what is, this is kind of my science fair project of what matters to me about Carol. And what I'm going to show you here is that all of the hearts have a C in them, and that's where Carol has impacted personally my life, and I don't mean in just emotional ways, but here's the quick walk down. My dad, David Young, went to Union Theological Seminary. Because he went to seminary, in part, is why his sister Jocelyn went to seminary, where at Yale Divinity, she and Carol were 2 of the only women in their class at Yale Divinity. So my parents raised us in Ohio, which is also where Carol's from, but though we were not near each other. My sister and I ended up at Orchard Park Presbyterian here with Lynn Weber as the director of Christian Ed. Lynn introduced me to her friend Carol. We went to dinner, which is where she put it together and said, wait a minute, is your aunt Jocko? And I said, no one calls her that, except those who went to college and seminary with her. Yes, it is. So we were at Orchard Park, where on the picture of ministers on the wall, David McDonald. So then we end up at Northminster. My sister, in the meantime, goes off to seminary at San Francisco Theological Seminary, becomes close with Carol, comes back to Bethel Presbyterian with her husband, Kurt, where minister David McDonald. And then she worked at LaPorte Presbyterian, minister Carol McDonald. In the meantime, my in-laws are at Northminster in the 70s. They are at LaPorte Presbyterian, where they become best friends with Sue Lawrence, who may come up in today's conversation, one of Carol's best friends. They end up at Northminster partly because of Carol. Their son, Tony, is at Northminster as a kid, is at LaPorte Presbyterian, gets recruited to go to Geneva Center, where he is with Lynn, who introduced us, to Kurt, who is married to my sister. So they're all at Geneva Center, all on staff because of Carol, and we end up at Northminster, and that's Carol in my life. We would not be married to the people we're married to, or doing all the things we're doing without this woman right here. So,
or Lynn Weber.
It all but it's all back to you. So, did you ever get a call to the ministry, and was it one of those, as we hear, as we've just talked about, a lot of Presbyterian ministers in my life and in yours. Did you have an actual call to the ministry, or what took you that path?
A call to the ministry. Well, I was always a church kid. My mom was a 14th generation Presbyterian, and in every generation there was a minister or an elder. So she was the first woman elder of her long line of Presbyterians. And she took me to church. I could say the Lord's Prayer when I was a little kid. I could stand on the pew and sing the doxology. I went to church camp. I went to Sunday school. I played the piano for Sunday school. I planned worship. I just assumed I would always be a teacher because both my parents were teachers. And my father was kind of a little academic snob. That sounds mean, but it really wasn't. I knew I couldn't just go to any graduate school. I had to go to special or whatever. Anyway, the summer after my freshman year in high school, I was at high school camp in a place called Lakeside, which is on Lake Erie. It's a Chautauqua type institution, and it's United Methodist. That I was part of my ecumenical journey was as a United Methodist. And on the Methodists are great. I mean, we are too, but they're great. You get kids all worked up, and then on the last night you have a big campfire and everybody cries and you're all wrought up. And so the first question that came to us as part of this closing night ceremony was, if you want to be a disciple of Jesus for your life, come forward and form a circle around the fire. So I got up and, did this thing go off? Mm-mm. Oh, okay. I got up and I went to the circle with a whole bunch of other kids and probably some adults too. I don't really remember. And then the next one came, and I'm just sort of getting my bearings about, okay, yeah, I'm going to be a disciple for the rest of my life. And the next call said, any of you who think you might be willing to dedicate your life to Christian service, I think was how it was said. And I thought about it, and then the next thing I know, I'm walking forward to the next circle, the inner circle. I'm 15 years old.
Wow.
And I have an academic father who, seminary, holy moly, that would not be in my father's lingo. So I went home. I don't think I told anybody for a couple days. And then I told my mom, and she was excited because she would have gone to seminary had that been an option for her in the 1930s. So then that was kind of the first thing. But then I spent the next 7 years kind of working it out, figuring out what that meant. And I knew I had to go. Well, I ended up at Yale Divinity School because my college had a really good, I think that was in that article that Carrie Savage Zimmerman wrote, but my college had a really good relationship with Yale Divinity School. A bunch of our professors had received their PhDs from there, and at least 3 of us went every year, practically 3 religion majors were sent off to YDS to learn to be ministers. And so that was fine with my father. He thought I was going to, and I started in a 2-year program. I thought, I'm going to be a teacher. That was what nobody knew what to do with a woman who wanted to be a pastor in the 60s. My own minister said to me, well, you could be a missionary. I said, huh? I don't even like to go into town. I live in the country. You're going to send me to the other side of the world? I don't think so. So I assumed I would be a teacher. But then I got to seminary and it kind of all began to unfold in a different path. So that was a good thing.
And you meet this tall, dark, and handsome guy, which when I think of David, this fabulous resonant voice, that's what I think of with David. But what attracted him to you was that you knew how to run a youth group.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I was 2 years ahead of David at Yale Divinity School, and we were in a class together, exilic prophecy, awesome. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And today, still to this day, there's some of my favorite biblical books. And S. Dean McBride, who happened to be Presbyterian, I don't think I realized that at the time, still one of my favorite professors ever. David also lived in a house. We had houses on campus. They were dorms, but little houses. And he lived with a bunch of my friends, so I often saw him in the cafeteria and in class. And so at that point, I'd had 2 years of running youth groups. And the minute you walk into seminary, they think you know how to do that. that, you've graduated from college. I don't know, Brian, I don't know if that was your experience, but it's sort of like, oh yeah, you know how to do this. You're in seminary.
You're young.
Woo! And he said, how do you do that? I said, well, you just kind of fly with the seat of your pants. And so, he was, that kind of, I think, attracted him to me. And we started taking walks and talking and
Beautiful.
never looked back.
So here you are going to be a minister couple, which was it's unusual now, but it's even more unusual in the 60s. How did you decide whose call you were going to follow?
Well, I guess I better explain about this ecumenical journey here. As I say, my mother, 14th generation Presbyterian. So I was baptized Presbyterian, or so that's the lore. I mean, I'm assuming that is accurate.
You don't have a record of this?
Well, I've never really checked it out. I mean, I have been baptized, I know that. And until I was 4, we lived in Florence, Alabama, where my dad was head of an English department at what is now the University of North Alabama, and we went to First Presbyterian. My mom and I went to First Presbyterian Church. My dad then went to be the head of the English department at Bethany College, where I then went to college. And the only church in town was a Protestant church, was Disciples, because Bethany is where the Disciples of Christ were founded. So I was a disciple for 4 years, from 4 to 8. Then we moved back to the family farm, my father's side. The only churches in town were Methodist and EUB, Evangelical United Brethren. So, and my dad's family was Methodist, so we went to the Methodist church. Okay. And when I was in high school, those two churches formed, the denominations came together. So I graduated from high school as a Methodist kid. I was on youth council in high school, did worship planning, did all kinds of stuff as a high school kid. I went off to Bethany College, Disciples, and served on a bunch of things there and did what we called deputation teams. We went out to different congregations and led worship. I, of course, being usually the only girl on the teams, never preached. I just did other things. So I get ready to graduate from Bethany. My mother, by this time, has gone back to the Presbyterian church because they've now founded a church in her county. So I'm sort of without a home in many ways. So I get to Yale Divinity School thinking I'm going to be a teacher. I'm assigned to a middle school in inner city New Haven as my field ed. I grew up on a farm, remember? I was so freaked out that the night a friend of mine and I were in what we called the machine room trying to get sodas out of the pop machine. Another student came in and he was talking about his field ed church and how he loved it. And it was in Mystic, Connecticut. It was an American Baptist church. I said, oh my gosh, that sounds really neat. He said, well, we're looking for somebody to work with junior highs. Are you interested? I said, you bet I am. So I went with them the next Sunday. So I started working for the American Baptists. Meanwhile, the Methodists back home really didn't know what to do with me. So I think my second year then of seminary, and I worked at their summer camp, the American Baptist camp. I was on the camp committee for the state of Connecticut. And so then Methodists didn't know what to, so I joined Union Baptist Church in Mystic, Connecticut, American Baptist. And so the American Baptists took me in at that point. So when I met David, who was Presbyterian and my roots, I was American Baptist with Methodist disciples and a few other things in my background. So I was ordained by the American Baptists. But it was never a question that we would come to a Presbyterian community, because that was never, at least for the first go-round, that was never a question. And as a colleague of mine used to say, there are no coincidences, Carol. But I'm convinced that it was a God thing that when David was called to the little church in Union Mills, the pastor up the road in LaPorte, a wonderful gentleman named Charlie Ross, was the Presbytery liaison to Union Mills, and he said, I really need somebody to help me. I really need somebody who will work with youth and do that kind of stuff. And so I got a job in a Presbyterian church. And I just then started, and by then the American Baptists didn't know what to do with me. And so I just kept doing Presbyterian things, got pulled into Presbytery committees, and Sue Lawrence and I, our friend that Jen mentioned, and I would go off and teach education stuff all over the Presbytery. And so then finally in 1978, my ordination was transferred because the American Baptists and the Presbyterians were in what we call in communication with one another. In other words, we talked to each other. They didn't think that I was suspect or whatever. So I'm really in many ways, a lifelong Presbyterian, but I'm sort of an ecumeniac. But that's a long way of answering that question. So,
and clearly a link between a lot of denominations as well.
So that first call was definitely, we came to Indiana. And then when David came to Orchard Park, again, a God thing, a presbytery position opened up in Christian Ed, and I went around to all these churches in Wabash Valley and worked, and that position just kept expanding, even as, David was at Orchard Park 3 years, and then we went to Wabash together, and then I was at Geneva Center. So, and at that point, when I knew I needed to leave Geneva Center, when we knew we needed to leave Wabash, that was my call. And we went to Geneva Center, and then we came to Indianapolis.
So knowing all of the different denominations, PCUSA is a connectional church, as I have been told from my birth on. What does that mean? What has it meant to you? And what do you wish that we knew more about what that means to be a connectional church?
I think maybe I'm a bit Pollyanna-ish at that point, but to me it means you've got colleagues, you've got connections, you've got friends, wherever that PCUSA symbol shows up. You could call, and I know Brian and Karen and I have had this, you could call a pastor in another city and say, I have a friend who's moving there. What would you recommend? I have someone who's in the hospital who needs care. What would you recommend? And though the way we do General Assembly is really changing, and some of that really bothers me, but it's like a big family. And it's knowing that, and it's also, my colleague at the Synod, Vern Sindlinger, used to say, it's knowing that the things we do here at Northminster and in the community and in the world, we're really doing on behalf of the whole church. We're the Presbyterian presence in this neighborhood doing this on behalf of the whole PCUSA. It's not just on behalf of Northminster, but it's on behalf of the whole church. And I wish folks could understand, I wish we had even a better understanding of that big church connection.
So we're both congregational and yet connectional.
Right.
You embody the connectionalism. What connections have brought you strength, humor, effectiveness? While she's thinking, have you all noticed that when she remembers somebody, it's first and last name, and it could be back like many, many, many years? Yeah. Bob Hymack mentioned that in his roast of you at your calibration, but it is truly amazing.
I think what has brought me, I don't know about humor. There have been some very.
It could be any of those.
There have been some humorous moments, but I think what has been so meaningful has been, a couple things. One is when people will say, "Would you consider doing such and such?" The way I got involved, I was just happily doing my thing at the Presbyterian Church of LaPorte. I'm in my 20s, and I didn't know I was going to be doing Christian education stuff, and so I'm learning. And the Presbytery person called and said, I'm doing this event and I'm recruiting people to be part of a team, and would you consider being part of this team? I thought, you don't even know me. And how do you, and so to feel, and that's when I said, yeah, if I can bring a friend. So I took Sue Lawrence. But for somebody to have confidence in you that you can do something. And that's happened, a bunch of times. I think the work that I have been called to do through General Assembly things, General Assembly committees, the connections have made there. That's just been really, or when the dean of the Doctor of Ministry program at McCormick Seminary called me and he said, we're starting the certificate in executive leadership and you've been suggested as someone who could teach one of the classes. I said, really? It's that we'll take a chance, on you. That's really, really meaningful. Or even, when Terry said to me, would you consider being a parish associate? I said, oh, I'd love it. Which I've always said is kind of Presbyterian language for retired ministers we don't know what to do with. We knew what to do with. We named them parish associates. But it's been that, and through that there have been some, And I think that connecting piece has been so important in the really hard times. When I had a cancer diagnosis in 2010, my Synod Executive Network, all my other colleagues across the country and everything. And then when David died in 2014, I can never forget how that network surrounded me and held me and still does. It's been.
So let's talk camp.
Oh,
You started, like every summer you were in seminary, and Geneva Center has been huge in your life. There are many, many successful Presbyterian ministers who do not love retreats, conferences, and camps the way you do.
that's true.
And Carol and I once pulled an all-nighter at Geneva Center because we had a friend in a dysfunctional relationship and we needed to get her out of it. And we could not rest until we figured out how we were going to do that. And I just had this sense in that moment while we were on that. I was like, you've done this with a lot of other people. Like, you're a camp, stay up all night and solve somebody's problem kind of person. Yeah. What is that about those kind of experiences? And from the time you were young, as you've said, and Lakeside through, what is it about those that is meaningful for you?
I think we hear people speak of thin places where you feel closer to God and closer to God through the relationships that you're involved in at the time. And I think those places have always been. Geneva Center was a very thin place for me. You could have conversations there that you just really couldn't have other places because you knew you were in sort of a dedicated, safe space. And people just opened up. I remember the summer that one of the summer staffers said, I really have to tell you, and he came out to me, he said, I'm gay, and I don't know what I said, you do not have to do anything. I trust you with every single child in this camp. And he said, and I want to tell everybody, the counselors, and I said, the summer staff, and I said, I think that's very important, but I want to be there when you do it. But those thin places where you just feel safe. And I think that happens in retreat settings, even if it's not a week long. I also had this theory that a week of summer camp for a child equaled a year of church school. When you think about, in kind of the old days, in the 70s and the 80s when I was a camp director. And so I really would encourage families to send their, and I watched so many of, especially the Tony's generation who worked with me. There was one whole summer staff. Almost every single one of them either went to seminary or, like Kurt, married a minister. And I think it was partly because of the shaping of that thin place for them.
Wasn't there a closure story too, where you had each person?
Well,
I love Carol's laugh.
The Presbyterian version of sort of the Methodist, get everybody to cry, was always on the last night you would do affirmations with your cabin, or if it was a small camp, you'd do it with the whole camp. And the summer of 1988, we had a whole bunch of high school kids who had served as counselors, kids entering their senior year of high school, who had served as counselors throughout the summer. So we knew that they shouldn't be that they needed special counselors. So Greg Neal, another dear friend of many of us, and I decided we would take a cabin, and we would have all the seniors. So we had this cabin of seniors. I think there were 6 girls and 6 boys who were all getting ready to go into their senior year of high school. It was fabulous. So the last night, speaking of all-nighters and thin places, I asked each kid, each camper, to write on a piece of paper their favorite place at Geneva Center. And then we did a little affirmation tour. And we started about 10:30. And at 3:30 in the morning, when we're finally on the last kid, one of the girls, Lola was her name. Her last name was Fox, if you want to know the whole name.
You're watching, Lola. Yes, wherever you are.
I don't know where Lola is. God love her. Tony might remember Lola. I don't know. No. Okay. Anyway, Lola says to me, now, when we get back to the cabin, are we going to say nice things about each other? I said, Lola, what have we been doing for 5 hours? So that was the thin place, maybe carried a little far. But yes.
I bet they remember it too. That's what's beautiful.
Greg does. He always, I mean, pardon me, but anybody who's watching, he would say, oh, Carol, that was affirmations from hell. And it was. And he's now a co-pastor with his wife. In fact, they worshiped here when he was on the Synod staff in the early 2000s. And he's now a co-pastor with his wife in Portland, Oregon. So the influence of that thin place.
That's awesome. So you mentioned it's been almost 10 years since losing David. Terry mentioned at your Carolbration that was the first you got a passport, was only after that loss in your life. And now you have been to many, many, many countries. What has travel meant to you personally, and also perhaps even in your ministry, knowing that you had, well, you said you barely left your hometown, and all of a sudden now you've gone a lot of places now.
It's been really wonderful to see parts of the world I really never expected to see or never thought I would see, and I still have a few on my bucket list that I want to see. But I haven't really, I didn't have a plan. Surprise, surprise. When one of my friends said to me, oh, I've always wanted to go to Russia. I said, oh, I'd love to go to Russia. So first big country, well, I went to Canada first with the passport, but right across the border, not very far in. So the first place I go using my passport is Russia. That was 2016. I probably wouldn't go now, but it was a lovely river cruise, and in fact, Terry went too, Jill Hudson, Terry, and a friend of ours named Carolyn Jones, and we had a great time, and that was the year I turned 70, so they had orchestrated birthday cards, and it was really exciting, and I had a cousin who had lived in Moscow for several years, and so it was neat to see where Jenny had lived and to see that. And then now it's been pretty much when somebody says, oh, what do you think about this? I say, oh, let's do it. That's why both Terry and I were disappointed about Iceland, because we really both wanted to go to Iceland. And then, of course, there was such inclement weather, rocky seas and fluctuating icebergs, and we didn't get to go to many of our ports. And so we spent most of the time just looking out at gray, and we couldn't even really see the water. I mean, it was really, but the parts of Iceland we saw were beautiful. She and I did, just the two of us, did a Baltic tour in 2018, and that was really fun. And my friend from Pittsburgh, Carolyn, whose husband died the same year. In fact, she really was the impetus for my getting the passport, because her husband died the same year David did, and they had always gone to Niagara-on-the-Lake in Canada to see theater. And that 2015, she said, would you be interested? I said, sure, I'd love to try that. So then I had to get and so we've become somewhat of traveling companions too. And we went to the Panama Canal, and I'd always wanted to do that. And we did a Rhodes Scholar trip to Hawaii, which again, we didn't see a lot of our ports because of weird winter storms in the Pacific. But it's helped me see that there's a world larger than, it's also painfully, sometimes I'm not very proud of Americans. And when we travel, some of us are not very pleasant, and we're not very gracious, and it makes me sad. And
Something else you said that you didn't start till later in life. So those of us who know you in this chapter so well now, it was speaking out on issues that wasn't part of sort of who you were before. What do you think was some of the push to do that, or how did you get comfortable with using your voice?
Two things. One, I think realizing at some point, okay, you've built relationships, Carol. You've got relationships with people all across the aisle. And those relationships, if they know you like them, those relationships are going to remain solid. The well, I don't know what's the word I want, but the pivotal General Assembly for the LGBTQ issue, well, there are several, but 1996 was the year that the General Assembly was in Albuquerque, and we had been putting off any kind of big discussion and vote on putting something in the Constitution. We had put it off 3 years here and 3 years here, and we're going to study this. And so going into that assembly, oh my gosh, there were so many overtures and of the kind of language that people wanted in the form of government related to ordination standards and exclusion of ordination. And by that point, I mean, I knew I had several very dear friends who were gay and lesbian. And I just, when one of them, and I decided, I said to David, I said, you know, I want to be a commissioner to that assembly. I want to be part of whatever happens. And so I submitted my name to the Presbyterian Nominating Committee. And in the meantime, as I was doing that, a dear friend said to me, she said, I don't know, we talked about her sexuality journey. I said, this makes me even more determined I want to be a commissioner. And I got elected. And I didn't have any leadership role at that assembly, but the commissioner who sat next to me, who was an elder from the Mishawaka Church in northern Indiana, was assigned to the committee that dealt with all the sexuality issues. And so supporting her and listening, and in those days, that's not that long ago, but in those days, 1996, all the advocates, you could put stuff at people's places in the assembly hall. So Pam and I would come back to our seats, and there'd be these like, commissioners who support gay ordination. You know, I'd say, oh, they know us. And we had a pretty progressive delegation, actually, from our presbytery that year. And I remember being in the room when her committee voted that horrible language that went to the floor of the assembly. And then after the vote was taken, and it was just horrible. The moderator of the General Assembly, the pastor of Fourth Church Chicago, John Buchanan, said, we will now have time for those for whom this decision has caused the most pain to speak out or just do. So we sang, we marched, we sang, we just marched around the assembly hall. And he was very clear. He said, and those who feel you cannot march, if you are in solidarity, we invite you to stand. Well, I have to tell you all this because this was 1996, and remember what happened to us in 1996 at Northminster. As I'm walking around the assembly hall with my friend Pam, I said, Pam, so we're walking, we're both crying. There was Fred Mathias standing, not walking with it, but standing. And so I thought, oh my gosh, that really was very touching to me. And that kind of clicked the switch for me. I got home and I said, okay, I know this language. I knew my presbytery would pass it, this horrible language. Wabash Valley, not Whitewater Valley voted no by one vote. Which I also remembered, had that presbytery meeting happened a week later, it probably would have been tied because Fred would have been gone. And I'm guessing he voted no on that overture, as I did. And but that kicked it in for me. I thought, okay, I'm done. I'm speaking out. So that was kind of the pivotal moment. But it was having built the relationships. I mean, to this day, some of my favorite pastor people are people who are very different from how I believe about things, although they've kind of been moving to the left, so it's from some of them. So,
Because of you.
well, no, not because of me, but I think just because of the world and the way people they've encountered.
You have often answered and asked others the constitutional question of will you pray for and seek to serve people with energy, intelligence, imagination, and love. Do you have any moments of witnessing those that you like to remember, of seeing that happen, or seeing someone follow through on those words?
Oh, my friends, the first one that comes to my mind is how this congregation lived through the pandemic. I mean, this congregation lived through the pandemic with so much energy. I didn't know. Who knew? I mean, how many were in this room on Terry's last Sunday? I mean, 5. Yeah, you and Tony and about
limited.
3 others, right? And that whole summer, who knew? I mean, and when Dave arrived, and of course Dave was the Energizer Bunny, as we all kind of remember a little bit, but the energy and the willingness to make intelligent decisions. It was such I think about all those wonderful children's sermon things that happened over on the internet, that, I mean, I could see the Kincaids and the Ellingtons and the Rakutos and other families doing the children's times, and Matt Krager putting them all together, and which obviously was just so undergirded with love for the church and for each other. I mean, I tell that story in other parts of the church, other parts of the world. I tell about you all and the pandemic and the moving, and then moving into the next phases with calling Brian and Karen. And it's just been, to me, that's a really vivid example, and the prayer seems deep here. I mean, yeah. And to me, energy is a prayer, and imagination is a prayer, and intelligence and love certainly is a prayer. So that's.
Well, you have been memorable to so many people, and in prepping for this, I was talking to a few people, and one said they remembered an opening question that you had for kind of the turn to your neighbor, and everybody say, what was the heat source in your home growing up?
Oh yeah, the 4 Quaker questions.
The question for you that came up then was, what was it? But then also, what's the heat source for you? Like, what's fueled you? Either today or what has fueled you? Yes, besides the very hot fire sitting next to us at this moment. And our cozy living room here.
I think what fuels continued is that there's so much to be done. That so much around it. My friend Jan Edmiston always asks, what breaks God's heart in your community? And I look, there's just so much around us that breaks God's heart, I believe, and there's so much to be done, and that fuels. And I know I can't, my internal, external, whatever, I can't do stuff the way some people do, but that fuels me. Frankly, the church fuels me. This church, but the church fuels me. Knowing that we can do things together that none of us can do alone. And so, and if we're going to even begin to attack or address things that break God's heart, we've got to do it together. That's why, I don't miss a chance to vote. I don't miss a chance to, I think that is something, yeah.
Did you have an interesting fuel source in your home growing up that made you ask this as a question?
Well, I think there's a series, I learned this from a colleague, a woman named Sue Whitford, who was one of my colleagues in the presbytery. And I think there are 4 questions, and they're the 4, she called them the 4 Quaker questions, I think. Oh. You start with, describe your house when you were 12 years old. Describe, how was your house heated? Who provided warmth for you? And then when did you first know God loved you? I think those were the 4 questions. So that was, yeah.
So you have a special gift of being able to be both warm and nurturing while also sometimes dealing hard truths. Sometimes even with snark. I mean, sometimes, thrown in there.
Usually with snark.
It's a great combination. So do you have any other like sort of life hacks for the rest of us of how you gracefully balance delivering both love and truth? Or, as you're saying, these things that break God's heart, but also, and things that somebody that we either as a group or individually do well, but also we could do more or better.
Several years ago, one of the things that I was privileged to be part of for 20 years probably was teaching folks who wanted to become transitional pastors. And my dear friend Sue Crummell, who was the executive presbyter in Peoria, Great Rivers Presbytery, brought to us a book called The Art of Possibility. And there's a wonderful video. I think I showed the video once at a session retreat here. But it's the story of a conductor of an orchestra. And the points in this book are, but the couple that really stick out to me, everyone gets an A. You don't start, in his classes, he would say, he'd have the students write themselves a letter or write a letter to their parents and say, I got my A on the first day of class, and this is how I got it. And then at the end, you get the letters back. But everybody gets an A. You're going to do fine. You're just going to be great. And so I kind of have had that attitude. And then, I guess the second one, the other point from that book that really sticks to me, he tells a story in the video in illustrating this particular point, of a famous conductor who jumps in a cab and says, drive, 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 drive. And the cab driver says, where do you want to go? And he says, oh, it doesn't matter. Everybody wants me. And, and Xander, the conductor who's writing the book, says, rule number 6. Don't take yourself so damn seriously. So rule number 6, that's the other thing. And so then my own personal way is often if somebody starts yapping, I just think, no, that's really about you. That's not about me. So you try not to take it on things that don't belong to you. But start out, everybody gets an A. You get an A. It's okay. It's going to be good.
So Frederick Buechner, one of his famous quotes is, the place where God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Can you say anything about a place where you've felt the deep gladness, and it could be separate from then where those intersected, but a place where you felt gladness and about where you see deep hunger?
Oh, golly, I don't even know where to start.
She did not want to hear questions in advance, by the way. So if this is seeming like some kind of difficult quiz, she's like, just hit me.
Just do it.
Let it roll. We did prep, but.
I think, again, an example from our life as a congregation, I've done, how many times have I've only done Clothe a Child twice, I guess. And the first time I did it was when Terry was on sabbatical. And I think we were still at the Sears store at that point, where Maureen's And I remember what a sense of gladness there was to be there with all of those wonderful children. And yet there was, you could sense that's feeding the deep hunger. And I see that happening in things that we're doing. But I still remember, and I remember saying to Jerry Gray that day that that was the words of the Messiah, all flesh shall see it together, the glory of the Lord. That's what this is. That was felt like the deep gladness and the deep hunger met in something that had been going on at Northminster for 40 years. I see that when I saw that at the Impact 100 Gala event where the team I chair, our nominee for the award won $100,000. And that's meeting a deep hunger. And so there's a deep gladness in helping that happen. I went to an event a few weeks ago called 100 Voices of Hope, which is an IU cancer research thing that they fund metastatic breast cancer research. A deep hunger for knowing and knowledge and a gladness to be able to help with something like that. That's what I think of when
Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. In your vision and in your hope, how do you look forward to us collectively, and that doesn't have to be Northminster, but our community, the church, doing better? And if we paint a picture, how will the church or humanity do better, do you think, in the future?
Okay, this may sound political, and I'm sorry, but
It's November.
right. And I don't live there. I mean, I grew up in Ohio. But I have a sense that what happened in Ohio yesterday with the constitutional amendment protecting rights is a sign that we're trying hard to do better. We're trying hard to work together to do better. I know I have friends in Ohio who worked very hard on that whole issue. And I think the more we recognize the rights of every human being, the rights of, I'm not saying it very well because I'm going to, I mean, you all know I'm pretty progressive. But the rights of human beings to make their own decisions and to we've got to do better, and I'm scared. I'm scared for our country. I'm going to stop.
And how complex Christianity is portrayed, perceived, discussed across that whole spectrum. It's
Absolutely.
Just a whole fascinating. As you look at as a chapter, I mean, you say you cannot possibly mean that being a parish associate means they don't know what to do with you. Because I would say Northminster knew very well what to do. Yes, and you have been such a gift to us. Do you think of this next chapter as kind of having fewer obligations? And if so, what brings you joy or freedom to do some things? Or with that, I mean, are you going to run for office? Are you going to...
Well, let me just say I am not going to run to be on the resident council at Hoosier Village. And that can go out on the airwaves. I have friends who are on that, and I don't need to be.
Let the record show. Gene Dodd says don't be on the dining committee.
Oh, not to worry.
So, you don't want to do that.
Not to worry. No, I look forward to doing some things here. In fact, Karen and I were talking, was it this week or sometimes, but getting ready for the next book thing that we're talking about. And I said, oh yeah, I'd love to help be part of that. I don't need to run it. I don't need to do the whole thing. I was just asked tonight to be a confirmation mentor, and I've never done that before. So I'm looking forward to that.
You're overqualified for the record.
That's why I wasn't allowed to do it before. So Terry told me I was overqualified. So I don't think so. But so I look forward to that. I'm pretty active in this group called Impact 100, which is a women's giving circle. We give away money, but it's a grant process, and trying to interest folks in those organizations. And supporting some of those. Maybe having a little more choice in terms of what I can choose to do, that kind of thing.
Any travel particular you want to do, or not necessarily?
Nothing's planned right now. I mean, I think, well, Terry and I we got money back for this Iceland thing.
Thank goodness.
So we're booked. Considering what's going on in the world, we're booked on a January 2025 trip on the Nile. So we shall see if that really happens. But But that's the only big trip that's booked. I go to Chautauqua every summer with my friend Carolyn from Pittsburgh. One of these times, I won't this next summer, but I want to go back to Montreat Worship and Music. I just thought that was fabulous. So yeah.
Even if you had the COVID duty.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Even if I got meals for all, right. I had great help, let me tell you. That was so funny though.
Well, thank you. This has been such a joy, and I think we can take any questions from the audience if we also want to do that. But I do want to close right. Yeah, you want to
I
go?
just wanted to point out that Carol McDonald was the educator of the year.
Oh.
I don't remember what year.
1999, the last one of the last century.
At the Association of Presbyterian Church Educators, and that's the whole.
1999 Educator of the Year for the entire United States, the entire
Well.
PCUSA.
Well, that was a long time ago. That was when I was trying to color my hair.
Overrated, as we've always
That's
said. Yes,
right.
Linda.
Well, this is a curiosity question. Where in Ohio did you grow up, since I'm a Buckeye?
Me too.
My parents both taught at Kent State University,
Oh, wow.
and my father that was his part of the state.
And where did you live?
Kent, Brimfield, a township.
Yep, I grew up North Canton, Ohio.
Oh yeah, Highway 43.
Yep.
Yep. We lived right off Highway 43.
Wow.
Yep. Yep.
If you go back 14 generations to that first Presbyterian in your family,
John's been doing the math the whole time.
is that like 300 years ago and where?
Well, my uncle, the genealogist, God rest his soul, said that he could chart us back to William the Conqueror. So I mean, but I don't know if the generation, it wouldn't have been Presbyterian then, but you know, that he could chart our family stuff back all the way.
Likely Scotland, is that where?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Others? Thank you.
Oh, thank you all, golly.